Hi there, I'm Doy Santos, and you're on The Cusp. Today on The Cusp, we're coming to the end of a three-part series on the question of Philippine federalism, as proposed by the Federal Institute Study Group of PDP-Laban, the ruling party. Now, in the first part of this series, we looked at the advantages of regional self-rule, and how that under a federal framework, a system of fiscal equalization between the regions would strengthen the capacity of smaller, less prosperous regions to be able to fund public services at the same standard as richer, wealthier regions. In the second part, we showed how the political and electoral reforms being proposed could lay the foundation for a mature political system in the Philippines, devoid of patronage and clientelism, or at least minimize the extent to which that occurs, and allow us to enjoy the full benefits of localization under a federal system. Now that Congress has formally started hearings on these proposed amendments to the Constitution, some legislators have started asking the question, well, what's the benefit? Why do we need to shift to a federal form of government? How is it going to be beneficial to the ordinary Filipino? Is federalism worth the trouble, in other words, of overhauling our system? And is it appropriate for the Philippines, a country of over 100 million people spread and dispersed over 7,000 islands? Arguing from a fiscal point of view, the public economist Anwar Shah of the World Bank, whom we encountered in episode 12, or part 2 of this series, and who is the editor of this book, A Global Dialogue on Federalism, Volume 4, which just happened to be lying around in the office, and I sort of nicked it for a while, just to show to you. He's written about the benefit, to answer the question that some of the senators are asking, para saan ba to? How is it going to be beneficial to my constituents? Here's his reply. He goes, federal fiscal constitutions have been recommended for large and diverse countries. So countries like the Philippines, 100 million, and so diverse culturally, right? Because they create incentives for multiple orders of government to provide services to their citizens in a competitive, efficient, equitable, and responsible manner. So after thorough study, that's the conclusion, right? These various layers of government, they will try to outcompete. They will try to provide services at the most efficient level. It's not true that it's going to create waste and too many layers causing too much bureaucracy and duplication, right? Well, it's possible, but in the end, it becomes efficient, equitable, and responsible. He goes on to say, this is accomplished while respecting diversity in local identities and preferences. Federal fiscal constitutions pay special attention to regional economic and digital divides to ensure a level playing field and to strengthen the economic union. Now, he's referring to the system of fiscal equalization that I just mentioned, which we discussed in episode 10, part 1 of this series, which the ruling PDP-Laban wants to institute through federalism. Now, Anwar Shah goes on to say, a review of comparative practices shows that federal countries do better than unitary countries on all aspects of governance. Citizen participation, political freedom, political stability, rule of law, bureaucratic efficiency, absence of corruption, human development, egalitarian income distribution, and fiscal and economic management. So you can't be as categorical as that, right? He's saying federal countries do better than unitary countries when it comes to these aspects. All of them desirable and things that our politicians always aspire, right? Particularly the ones who have a liberal bent in them, okay? Now, he goes on to say the reason why. He says, this is because federal fiscal constitutions pay a great deal of attention to clarifying the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities of various orders of governments, and designing fiscal institutions compatible with responsible, and accountable results-based governance. So there you have it. Federalism is the answer to the question, the question that people have been asking, what system, is there a system that will provide more efficient services in a more directly accountable manner? And the answer to that is, according to Shah, is yes. And it's federalism. And so it's not true. It's not true. Professor Jean Pilapil's contention that there's no argument for shifting to federal. Okay, that's backed up by the literature. There is literature, and I've just quoted it to you. Okay, it just so happens it doesn't come from his neck of the woods, you know, comparative political science. It comes from a broader point of view. Okay, and it comes from studying larger quantities of countries, unitary versus federal, and looking at their performance vis-a-vis some of these measurements for the various constructs like bureaucratic efficiency, absence of corruption. There are all these there are all these indicators that measure and track that, right? He's looked at a broad range of countries, done the maths, you know, done it in his computer, and produced his results, and they're quite significant. They're quite significant results. Okay. So now, when it comes to a country, as I said, as diverse and populous as the Philippines, federalism is recommended. Now, a bit of context and history here. In 1935, when the Philippines adopted the Constitution, the first, well, actually, I don't know whether it was the second or third, but the first Constitution under the Americans, right, under U.S. colonial rule, where we adopted the presidential system, patterned after the American presidential system, we still hadn't had the benefit of the lessons learned from Australia, which was federated in 1901, in Canada as well. Both of them are federal and parliamentary, as well as the French, post-war French, after de Gaulle, I'm not sure if it's the fifth, I think it's the Fifth Republic, and the German experience, right, after World War II. So we had not yet had, in 1935, this is like just after the Great Depression, okay, in the United States, and just leading up to World War II, we had not yet had the benefit that of the experience, of the lessons from the experience of these countries that still had to be realized, right? Okay, it was still evolving. Okay, under the American tutelage, you know, the Americans in 1935, they were just about to reach global ascendancy, much like the way China is trying to reach, you know, ascendancy today. So we thought, yeah, pattern it after the rising power of America. All right. However, now, sorry, just to continue with the context, in 1987, we tried hard after, you know, the fall of President Marcos, his regime, we tried half-heartedly to move the Philippines towards a multi-party parliamentary democracy, as in most of Europe. You know, and Europe is now taking over from the US as the leader of the free world. You have France and Germany combining to lead the EU, to take the mantle of from America, which is surrendering now the reins of multilateralism throughout the world. France and Germany, France under Macron and Germany under Merkel, they're taking the reins from America and driving the agenda forward for liberalism to triumph over populism. Okay? Now, so we didn't have the benefit of that experience because it was still the 1980s, you know. America was still the unipolar, you know, leader of the free world. Okay? After the fall, well, the Berlin Wall, you know, fallen already, whatever. Okay, America was predominant. Okay, so we thought, okay, let's just follow the example of the US, okay? It's characteristic of us Filipinos. Whoever, you know, we just follow whatever is the flavor of the month, kind of, okay? But, you know, to be honest, we didn't really have the benefit of hindsight, okay? So we thought, okay, just follow the American practices. But ever since we adopted the current constitution. After the presidency of Cory Aquino under Fidel Ramos, now we started to see how effective governance would look like under a strong leader, okay? And this is when the attempts to try and move to a shift to a parliamentary system started. Now, contrary to some claims that 2010 to 16 was the golden age of good governance in the Philippines, right, under President Noynoy Aquino's Daang Matuwid, the World Bank's good governance indicators actually show that after the midpoint of his presidency, all the indicators, I think 5 out of the 6 indicators started to go down, and we were backsliding again. And we had never reached the level set by under Fidel Ramos. Okay, so the golden age of good governance, when stuff happened, when rule of law was starting to be put in place, when we were moving towards a modern state, right? It was during the time of Ramos, 92 to 98. Now, some people will criticize Ramos and say, okay, what about Pea Amari? What about this and that? Okay, but, you know, compared to all his peers, that was actually relative to all his peers. No one came close to him, actually. No one came close to President Ramos. And so the debate continues now as to, because the weaknesses of the Constitution were apparent, okay? Stuff needed to be done, but it wasn't happening as quickly as we needed it to, okay? So then, how do we improve that? How do we get to that place in time? Now, in this episode, apart from looking at federalism, we're going to conclude by looking at the proposed shift to a semi-parliamentary system. Now, this has nothing to do with federalism, okay? Because this is the form of the government. This is not the structure, or is it vice versa? Okay, that's the form. Semi-parliamentary system is the form. Federalism is the structure. Structure in terms of the layering, the different orders of government, federal, regional, local. This one is the form, whether we have a president or a prime minister or both. Okay? So it's completely separate from the question of federalism, but because it's being proposed in line with the shift to federalism, I'm discussing it here, all right? Now, President Duterte said, no, I want a strong president, no need for a prime minister, but his party, this is what they have proposed. And it's being debated. Once you open up, it's up to Congress, after all, to debate it. So it's going to be tackled, so we might as well discuss it, right? Now, cynics have pointed out that this would lead to the lifting of term limits and allow the incumbent party to rule indefinitely. And even if we assume that that's not the case, what's the benefit of shifting to a semi-presidential, semi-parliamentary system? Haven't we tried this under President Marcos? Actually, we tried, but it didn't actually get fully realized. Cesar Virata was supposed to be the PM, but he never really got to wield the office, occupy the office. We had ministries, but we didn't have a prime minister. They were still all sort of reporting to Marcos. Okay, now another question, wouldn't it weaken the system of checks and balances that we currently enjoy? The beauty of the American system is the separation of powers between executive, the president, legislative, Congress, and the judiciary. Okay? And once you start to fuse some of these powers in a parliamentary system, the prime minister has both executive and legislative powers, then you kind of sort of lose some of the checks and balances. Okay? So is that going, that's one of the criticisms, right, of a parliamentary Westminster style system that, the Brits use, okay? So, in answer to that question, let me just use the writings of the notable political economist Francis Fukuyama, okay? Francis Fukuyama, who authored among several books, the Origins of Political Order. This is volume 1. I'm going to quote actually from his volume 2. He contrasts the struggle of both the British and the Americans in creating a modern state back in the 19th century, okay, through civil service reforms. In the UK, it took a mere 16 years to accomplish this after the Northcote Trevelyan Report of 1854. while in the US it took 80 years, or 5 times as long. With the assassination of the newly elected President James Garfield in 1881 by a disappointed office seeker, prompting the US Congress to pass the Pendleton Act 2 years later, which created the US Civil Service Commission. Now, as Fukuyama noted, and I quote, "Creating a modern Weberian state in the United States was a protracted process due to the obstacles placed in its path by the US Constitution's checks and balances. Entrenched party politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, had no interest in giving up their right to make political appointments. It took until the New Deal in the 1930s for the vast majority of federal employees to be put under the civil service classification system. In many large cities, including New York, Boston, and Chicago, municipal and political machines were not dismantled until the 1960s. Okay, so under the British parliamentary system, Fukuyama concludes, reform was more swift. Civil service reform, professionalizing the bureaucracy, making political appointments free of political interference, that was accomplished in a shorter space of time. Under the American system, with all of its checks and balances, you might have a president who wants reform, you have a Congress that opposes it, and they just sort of cancel each other out. You might have an upper house that wants it, a lower house that doesn't want it, and then they cancel each other out, okay? So there's a lot of checks and balances, in other words, and the whole system is geared towards gridlock. Okay, because the founders, the framers of the US Constitution actually didn't want the federal government to be able to do anything. So they constructed a system where it'd be very difficult to accomplish much. As Jefferson said, the government that governs least governs best. That's it. But under the British system, Westminster parliamentary, the executive, prime minister, once he and his cabinet decided, okay, let's have these reforms, because they are elected by majority in the parliament, they automatically, whatever policies they decide, gets adopted straight away. Now, I worked in a parliamentary federal system, and I know from personal experience that stuff tends to happen quickly. The difficult part is arriving at the policy, through consultation and stakeholder engagement, research, and that sort of thing. But once, the government has, usually the government commissions a parliamentary inquiry, they bring in people, there are hearings, the goal of which is to come up with a new policy or new laws. And so the findings are usually published, but there's usually an independent inquiry, there's an expert who's brought in. He does his parliamentary inquiry tasked by the parliament. Afterwards, he produces a report, maybe within 30, 60, 90 days or whatever. All right? And then he submits it to parliament. And then the cabinet takes that and it has to respond to it. And the government will either adopt the recommendations found in the report or not. And then they craft laws. The cabinet has a law in place. And then once cabinet decides, yes, let's adopt this, then it's sent to the House. And then usually the House, if they hold the majority, it's passed. The battle's over. No more need for pork barreling, or whatever. Okay? So that's the swiftness with which the Westminster system, operates. I know there are people in the Philippines, like Manolo Quezon, who are so sentimental about the US 1935 Constitution that his grandfather was in charge of, all right? But that was kind of like a product of our history. That was cultural domination by the US, okay? We took that system and we really kind of, so if in the US nothing gets done, in the Philippines, really, it's a lot worse. Okay? Now, I spoke to one of a senator a current senator now, about this, and I explained this to him in his office, and he told me, if it took the Americans 80 years, it'll take us 200 years to achieve these reforms. Now, are we willing to wait 200 years? That's the question. That's the burning question, all right? We need reform. But if we try to pursue, now people say, but you know, changing the structure, you need to change the hearts. The people have to change. Otherwise, we're just going to have the same problems, right? Men are not angels, right? While it's true that you need systems of checks and balances to put a check on people's behavior, too much check and not enough balance becomes the problem. Under our system, where there's no party discipline, you have to buy votes in the House in order to get your legislation passed, even from the members of your own party. But if so we need to somehow break free from that problem, okay? But that in a nutshell, I would put to you, is why moving away from a presidential system with all the checks and balances is needed. But so why do we adopt a hybrid system? Okay, that's what's being proposed by PDP-Laban. So why have a president and a prime minister? That's what they're proposing. As they found when they did some consultation, the presidential politics is embedded in our cultural DNA. Okay, we love presidential politics. We love electing our head of state. So they thought, okay, as a concession to popular sentiment, we can't really abruptly get rid of that institution. Let's maintain it, but let's change it a bit. Let's split the executive function, give the day-to-day operations to the prime minister. The president's kind of like our external spokesman to the world, takes charge of foreign affairs and national defense, that sort of thing. I won't get into all the reasons that they pointed out, but one of them, to retain a president, is to have greater stability in the system. A prime minister can be voted out of office by his colleagues. And so during that time when a new government is being formed, a new prime minister is being elected or whatever. But actually it's very swift. Usually when there's a leadership spill, somebody challenges the PM, says like, I challenge you, in their own party room, and then people vote. Usually it's the next day there's a new prime minister. It's so quick. It's not like the presidential where you have the president elect and he's waiting for 30 days to enter the office. It's not like that with the prime minister. It just happens so quickly. People just go to sleep one night, and then the next day they might find out that there's a new prime minister. Okay, that happened under Kevin Rudd in Australia. Okay, of course let's not talk about that. But anyway, so to stability, the president, as in France, so he maintains the government, just as the Queen of England. She is the emblem of stability. She's above the day-to-day politicking that goes on in Parliament. She's independent of that. The president will sort of become like that. The other problem as well is, of course, to preserve national integrity and that sort of thing. So if he's when all of these debates are happening, like in Germany, it's taking them a while to negotiate after the election who's going to form government. The president can be there and preserve, the state, the integrity of the state. So if there are secessionists or whatever, like Catalonia style or Basque type separatists, in Canada they have Quebec, right? In the Philippines, of course, we have the culturally distinct region of Muslim Mindanao. So having a president sort of provides greater stability. All right. So that's why having a hybrid makes sense for our situation. All right. You never know what might happen. The legislative branch, the federal parliament will be made up of two chambers, the Federal Assembly, which is the lower house, and the Senate. And while you have two houses, as we currently do, the roles are going to be different. The role of the Senate as opposed to the Federal Assembly or the lower house will be will be distinct from one another. It sort of follows the German model, where you have the Senate, which is elected representatives for the regions, or each regional government elects the Senate. The lower house is comprised of people who represent the population, because it's by district and proportional. Okay, so the districts can be created, and they tend to be created when there's it's pro rata to the population. As the population grows, you create more districts, okay, to serve the people, so that there's not too big there's not such a wide number of constituents that each representative has to cater to, has to serve. Okay, so we create more districts in line with our population as it grows. In the Senate, the number is fixed, okay? And the regions will have the same number of senators for each region. So they'll have equal representation. So regardless of whether the population in one region grows or not, they'll still have the same number of senators as this region. And that what leads to is a kind of checks and balances still. So that the majority, the more populous states or regions, don't get to dictate on the less populous ones. Now, I happen to have seen that in Australia. You know, there are smaller states and there are bigger states. And the Senate usually provides a veto power against the tyranny of the more populous regions, okay? Now, it's true that while all legislation under their proposal will emanate from the House, okay, you have members filing their bills here representing the population. They can craft their bills, they can craft the legislation and pass it. Once it goes to the Senate, the role of the Senate in Australia, and I believe in Canada as well, and Germany, is to improve the legislation. So they don't initiate legislation, they improve it. And that's a good system to have, because there's no more bicameral conference, whatever. There's no separate 3 readings in the Senate and the House, and then they come together and they hammer out their differences. No. This one performs a check on this one, okay? The upper house performs a check on the lower house. And that's a good system. It's quite a good system. Like I said, the Americans didn't have... The Americans were first, but the Australians and Canadians and the Germans, they saw what was happening in the US and they said, we can do one better than you, mate. And so that's what they did, okay? So... but the lower house as well is not just going to be comprised of district representatives. Their proposal is that 60% would be district representatives. The other 40% would be based on proportional voting. Okay, so in other words, it's like the party list system, which occupies 20% of our current Congress, the House of Reps. But under this proposal, it's going to be 40%. And how they're going to distribute that is proportional. Now, it's not clear whether that's going to be proportional based on the national or proportional based on each region. It's not quite clear. But nevertheless, what this is called is the mixed member proportional system, MMP, which is practiced in Germany and New Zealand. That's how they elect their parliament. And I'll leave a link to a video explaining exactly how this operates. But what it does is it makes the parliament more representative of the people's will than you would have if under a strict sort of by district only. Because as we can see, you know, a party could earn 5% of the votes all throughout the country, but not win a single seat to represent a district, not win a single district election, right? But what about those 5% who voted that party? They don't get any they don't get any representation. Under the mixed member proportional system, they do, right? Because the other side of the chamber, they fill that up so that overall, if let's say you have 100 seats in Parliament, and this party won 5%, they'll get 5 seats in Parliament, so that the number of their seats, the proportion of their seating in the Parliament is more or less representative of the vote nationwide. So you still have districts, so you can still run to your MP. Hey, I need this, I need that, can you help me? But then you also have these parties that are the members of parliament that are elected under the proportional representation system. Though it favors the smaller parties, like the Greens, like whoever, In our case, it tends to be the progressive parties. But that's the voice of the people, so they should get, and there's no cap on the number of seats that any party can win. So the Makabayan bloc tends to chop and change their parties because there's currently a cap of 3 seats per party in the party list. Under this system, it's just limited by the proportion that you actually get. So if you get 20% of the overall vote, you get 20% of the chamber. Which is more fair, actually. And the Senate will be sort of, aside from performing a check based on a regional perspective, they'll be screening the cabinet appointments made by the president and the prime minister. So the president gets to nominate who's the foreign minister because he's in charge of foreign affairs, defense minister because he's in charge of national defense. But the prime minister, by and large, gets to pick the rest of the cabinet, who's head of finance, who's head of budget, that sort of thing. And the cabinet itself, under a parliamentary system, usually they come from within the parliament. So no problem of a congressman having to resign because he's accepting a position in cabinet. There's none of that. And once he's in cabinet, if he resigns, he can resign from his cabinet position. He'll still be a member of parliament. So we avoid that problem. But under this system, it's kind of like the French model, where people from the private sector can still join cabinet, but a majority of the cabinet must come from parliament. And if you come from the private sector, you need Senate concurrence to that appointment. You'll have to be screened. But what this does is it avoids the problem we currently have with the Congressional Commission on Appointments, where Gina Lopez and others like her. Such a waste of political capital and time. Such a waste of energy and talent, to be honest. Under this system, Gina Lopez could just run and get in a seat under the proportional system. She'd be listed by the party. Okay? And then she could be appointed to cabinet and she wouldn't need screening anymore. Automatically in the cabinet. Okay? So I think it's a much better system than what we currently have, where you have these holdover guys. They get appointments during recess because they won't pass through the commission on appointments. It's all just a bunch of, there's horse trading, give me projects, help me out here with this problem in your department, and I'll give you my vote. Okay, there's less of that under the system, right? You'll still be able to get the benefit of people in the private sector, brilliant people, okay, who might work in technocratic positions in cabinet. By and large, you avoid the process of having to go through the mill. So now we come to the end. What are we to make of all this? When I say what are we to make of all this, I'm talking about part 1, part 2, part 3. Okay? So if some of this sounds alien to you, go back and review the 2 previous episodes that are part of this series. I have no time to recap and discuss them. Okay? So, under the Federal Institute's proposals, the executive powers are split between the President and the Prime Minister, with the President in charge of national defense, as I said, foreign affairs, PM, domestic affairs. With respect to legislative functions, it's also split between 2 chambers, Senate and the Federal Assembly. But the Assembly, which elects the PM, takes responsibility for setting the agenda, determining the budget, and initiating legislation. The Senate's role will be to consider regional interests to improve legislation and confirm presidential and PM appointments who come from outside Parliament, as well as ratify international treaties entered into by the President. Legislative powers will also be split between the federal government, the federal Parliament, I should say, and the regional assemblies, which will have the right to set local specific taxes on things like minerals and other assets and transactions within their borders. So things like land tax, stamp duty, vehicle registration, for instance, they can set the rates for that. The semi-presidential system aims to fuse some elements of the executive and legislative branches. This removes some of the gridlock that is present in a purely presidential system. But a hybrid system is also more stable than a purely parliamentary system. The president, as head of state, can maintain stable government while parties negotiate with each other to form a government, or when parliament is dissolved after a vote of no confidence succeeds in toppling the PM. It also provides more checks than a unicameral system, with the presence of the Senate, which serves to veto proposals based on regional perspective. And a bi-cam setup is essentially for a federal system, okay, where you have various regions that need to be represented in one of the bodies, right, in one of the parliamentary bodies. This ensures that smaller, less populous regions are not simply dismissed by the larger, more prosperous ones and populous ones. The only criticisms I have, okay, of the proposals are the following. Number one, the president could still be elected by a plurality of votes, not a majority. So as I said in another episode, which is to address this problem, we either need to shift to a presidential runoff system or use a system of preferential voting, which is practiced in Australia, where you rank the candidates in order of preference, okay? And that eliminates the need for a presidential runoff. It's a virtual runoff, in effect, in one round, okay? You'll arrive at a majority president at the end of that process. It doesn't... Now, this would allow our presidents to get elected with a majority of votes and prevent strategic voting, where you have a first preference among the 5 candidates, but this candidate's not going to win, so I'm just going to go for this one, all right? That one is the lesser of all the rest, lesser evil compared to all the rest. Yeah, okay. Strategic voting. In a preferential voting or presidential runoff, you could go for your first preference in the runoff, or in the preferential vote, put number 1 beside his name or her name, okay? Number 2 for the one that you think is the least bad among the rest, okay? So you can do that, and that would fix the problem. That's the first criticism I have, which can be easily fixed, right? Number 2, the ban on political dynasties, which we tackled in part 2 of the series. While it prevents relatives to the second degree of consanguinity or affinity, meaning by marriage, from occupying posts in the same jurisdiction as an incumbent, it doesn't prevent them from succeeding the incumbent. So this is their definition of political dynasty is you guys are in the same family occupying different positions within a province or a city simultaneously. Okay, they would ban that, but nothing prevents an incumbent, when their second term of office is up, to be succeeded by a relative. Okay, so for me that doesn't go far enough, but of course I recognize the realities. What are the chances of this passing? Might as well compromise or get something rather than nothing. Okay, so I understand the logic behind that, but I feel you should just try and press the issue as far as you can, and if you can't get everything that you want, then you can fall back to a position. You don't start from the fallback position, you start with a more aggressive position. But unfortunately, even the president doesn't seem to favor even this scaled back version. But we'll see what happens, Number 3, the gradual phase in of regional governments. It'll take 5 to 10 years after the regional and local government code is enacted. And this could lead to uneven development, as some richer regions with better institutional capacity might move more quickly towards federalism than weaker ones. Or you might have the situation where some regional governments might postpone doing it on purpose, because like the regional commission, which will be comprised of governors and mayors, like the Regional Development Council, they're actually going to have executive and legislative powers. So, and they would rotate amongst themselves who would be the chairman, who would be the head of the commission. Okay, like they do now. Who's the head of the Regional Development Council? But this time they'll have real power. Okay, so they might be tempted to say, well, why do we need to cede authority to another body, a regional assembly? Anything can happen there. And they're going to elect a chief minister, you know, to be the head of the regional government, whereas I could actually do it myself, you know. So the 5 to 10 year period, I think it's a bit too long. You know, I mean, that was done, I understand, was done because of the criticism that it will take time to build the capacity of the regional governments. But, you know, procrastination, I don't know. So it could work one way or the other. I just don't know how that's going to work. Okay? So maybe a bit more tweaking and a bit more scrutiny is needed. Finally, I note that while the federal constitution seeks to delineate the roles and functions of each layer of government, federal, regional, local, in a kind of layered cake, you know, layered cake with different layers, ube on top, whatever, in the middle, you know, avocado, and at the bottom, okay, layered cake. In practice, what tends to happen is a marbled cake where all the layers are kind of like, you know, if this is the different layers of government and you say, this is your function, you're in charge of education, this one's in charge of health, this one's in charge of sweeping the streets or whatever, cleanliness, law and order, whatever. In reality, what tends to happen is all these layers share in providing some aspect. So like health, you'll have health policy done by the feds, regional does the actual implementation, and so forth. Or funding. Funding is funded by the federal government, but implemented by the regional and local governments. That's sort of the marble cake, where everyone's kind of involved in some aspect of program or policy. No one is really fully in charge. And so what this highlights is the need for collaboration, because at the front end, the customers really don't care which layer of government. To them, government is just government. They're not aware whether it's state government, whether it's city government, or whether it's national government. All they care about is getting what they need, the services that they need from government. So this will entail intergovernmental collaboration, working together through different across different silos for the most part, and across different layers. And that will be the challenge. So in other words, it will be a kind of shared governance in the Federal Republic, which is the sort of the definition of federalism: self-governance with shared governance. All right, so it's not really a criticism, it's more of an observation. So let me conclude by saying this. While there may be many virtues found in the 87 Constitution, improvements can still be made. It's not true that the 87 Constitution is perfect, all right, and does not need any kind of improvement. It's full of flaws. Some people will say, well, that's the beauty of it. It's full of flaws, and yet it still works. No, it doesn't work. Okay, we need to fix it. We need to have several fixes, actually. Now, from the lessons learned over the past 30 years, we now have the opportunity. I mean, even the American Constitution, there's like the First Amendment. I don't know how many amendments there have been over time. So it's a living, breathing document. It's not something that's like the 10 Commandments instead set in stone. Thou shalt not create an 11th commandment. No. The Constitution is a living, breathing document. From our experience, from our lived experience, we need a society which isn't able to learn is going to stagnate. Joseph Stiglitz. Okay, so we need to heed the lessons of the last 30 years and make the improvements in a pragmatic fashion. Let's look at the proposals based on their merits, and not use too much of a partisan lens all the time. Okay, partisanship. While it's fun to be tweeting, based on your party affiliation, yeah, give them hell. But really, that's no way to govern a society. Okay, it just pulls us further and further apart. makes us more extreme, more polarized. Let's look at it from a practical perspective, because there are a lot of good things that could come out of it. Let's not railroad the process, but at the same time, let's not shut it down prematurely just because we don't trust the person who's proposing it. There are several authors here. Actually, it's coming from all over, all around. So let's be mindful of that. The post-war regime lasted 30 years from 1945 to 73. Marcos lasted 20 years from 65 to 86. The post-EDSA regime lasted 30 years from 87 to 2017 and counting. Could we be ready to embark on the next chapter of our evolution as a nation? Only time will tell. So that's it on the question of Philippine federalism. Don't forget to visit our website. Send your comments and feedback. Most welcome on Facebook and Twitter. Like and subscribe our YouTube channel as well. This has been Doy Santos thanking you for joining me and hope to see you again on the next edition of The Cusp.